My son stood up in the middle of the attorney's office, his voice shaking with rage. "She left everything to you? Are you serious?" He was glaring at me like I had stolen something sacred. And honestly, I felt like I had just been hit by a truck myself. I hadn't seen my ex-husband Ronald in 15 years. And now, not only was I sitting in the room where his will was being read, I had just learned I was his primary heir. I'm Elaine Parker. I'm 66 years old. I live alone in a modest apartment. I was a public school teacher for over 3 decades. I raised my son Brandon with the best of what I had: love, stability, and values that didn't come from a credit card statement. But those things never seemed to be enough. Not for Ronald, not for Brandon. 15 years ago, when Ronald and I divorced, I thought that was the end of our story. He kept the business. He kept the house, and most painfully, he kept our son on his side. And yet here I was listening to a lawyer read words that would change everything. This is the story of what Ronald left behind, why he did it, and how the truth finally came to light, not just for Brandon, but for me, too. It's a story about silence, grief, regret, and in the strangest way, forgiveness. I met Ronald Parker when I was 22 and fresh out of college. He was 2 years older, working part-time as a lecturer in economics at the local university and full-time dreaming about changing the world. He had this kind of quiet fire, ambition without arrogance, drive without cruelty. I was drawn to it, maybe because I had always been the grounded one, the responsible one. I wanted to teach. He wanted to build something bigger. We balanced each other. We got married in the fall of 1982. Nothing fancy, just a backyard ceremony under a red oak tree and a potluck dinner with our families. I remember my mother crying when she handed me her wedding ring, whispering, "May this bring you strength, not just luck." For the first 10 years, life was good. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Our son Brandon was born in the middle of a snowstorm, and Ronald was the one who ran outside to flag down the ambulance when the roads were too icy. I still remember how he held Brandon for the first time like the child was made of glass and gold at once. He was a good father in those early years. He read bedtime stories. He made pancakes on Sundays. While I taught second grade, Ronald worked on his business idea at night. I graded papers at the kitchen table, while he scribbled plans across napkins and notebook pages. I believed in him. I supported him even when the bills piled up, even when his first 2 ventures failed. When he finally got his break with a consulting contract that grew into something far bigger, I cheered the loudest. He'd built something from nothing. I was proud. But success has a way of shifting things, sometimes so slowly, you don't even notice. He started coming home later. The napkins disappeared, replaced by leather briefcases and long business trips. The man who once danced barefoot in the living room now checked his watch during dinner. I told myself it was just a phase, that all the sacrifices would be worth it, that when the dust settled, we'd find our way back. But the dust never settled. It only grew heavier. And without realizing it, we stopped holding hands, stopped sharing things, stopped being a we. Still, I held on because love, when it's real, doesn't just vanish. It stays. Even if you're the only one still carrying it. The year Ronald's company hit its first million in profit, everything began to shift. Suddenly, our cozy 2-bedroom became too small. We moved into a house with 5 bathrooms and a gated driveway. I was happy for him. I really was. But something about that house felt cold, empty, like a showroom where no one actually lived. Brandon, our son, was 10 then. Ronald enrolled him in a private prep school an hour away. New uniforms, robotics clubs, Mandarin classes. Brandon went from being the kid who brought earthworms into the kitchen to a boy who rolled his eyes at my old station wagon. At first, I thought the changes were harmless growth, I told myself. Just part of the journey. But the more Ronald succeeded, the more I faded into the background. His business dinners became galas. His lunches turned into power meetings. And I was still just a school teacher in shoes that were always a little scuffed. I started getting comments at parties. "So, Elaine, are you still working? It must be nice to not need to work anymore." They meant well, I think, but every sentence felt like another way of saying, "Why are you still you when he's become him?" Even Ronald began to shift his tone. "Elaine," he once said gently, "you've done your part. You don't have to work anymore." But teaching wasn't just a job to me. It was my identity, my purpose. I wasn't ready to trade that in for brunches and charity boards. The cracks deepened when Brandon turned 12. Ronald gifted him a top-of-the-line laptop, something I didn't even know existed. "He needs to think digitally," he said. "The future doesn't wait." I suggested a fishing trip instead. Just the three of us, like we used to do. Ronald smiled politely and said, "You really don't get how fast the world is moving, do you?" That night, Brandon sat at the marble kitchen island, scrolling through investment apps. While I tried to get him to talk about his science project, he barely looked up. I was still in the same house, but it no longer felt like home. Even our meals changed. Dinner was catered more often than cooked. Conversations became updates, not connection. Ronald would ask, "How is school?" but never wait for an answer. The intimacy that once defined us had been replaced with polished surfaces and polite distances. We were living in a luxury bubble, and I didn't belong. I wasn't ashamed of my life, but I began to feel like Ronald was. It showed in his eyes when I talked about my students or suggested we donate to a local shelter instead of expanding the guest house. It showed when he introduced me at functions as Brandon's mother, never as his wife. And slowly, the woman who once dreamed under red oak trees started to disappear inside a life she never asked for. When Ronald told me he wanted a divorce, he said it like a business proposal. "We've grown apart, Elaine. This isn't personal. It's just where we are now." No shouting, no tears, just paperwork on the dining room table. The man I had built a life with for 25 years was now negotiating terms like he was closing a quarterly deal. I didn't fight him. Maybe I should have. But after so many years of feeling invisible, I didn't have it in me to beg for a love that was already gone. He offered me the old house in Charleston, the one we bought when Brandon was 3, and the paint was still peeling, and enough money to live comfortably, if modestly. It wasn't fair, but it was quiet, and I was tired. Brandon chose to stay with his father. I understood. Ronald's world sparkled. Mine did not. What hurt more wasn't that he stayed, but that over time he stopped calling me mom. He started calling me Elaine in emails, cold, businesslike, detached. I became a footnote in their lives. The people around us accepted the version of the story Ronald presented, that I lacked ambition, that I let things go, that I couldn't keep up with him, and I never corrected them. I didn't have the energy to rewrite a narrative that the world had already agreed upon. So, I started over quietly. I moved into my Charleston house, went back to teaching part-time at a local literacy center, baked muffins for the kids on Thursdays. I adopted a rescue cat named Walter. I lived small, but I lived honestly. I didn't chase headlines or conferences. I didn't network. I just existed on my own terms. And for a long time that was enough. Not glamorous, not heroic, but enough. Until one afternoon, 15 years later, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end told me that Ronald had passed away and that I was named in his will. I remember standing in my tiny kitchen, holding the receiver to my ear, wondering how the man who had once let me go so easily could have remembered me at the very end. 15 years passed like a quiet river, slow, steady, unremarkable. I spent most mornings walking to the corner cafe, reading with a cup of Earl Grey, nodding at familiar faces. I ran workshops at the literacy center. Sometimes I helped the neighbors with their kids' school applications. On Sundays, I called my sister in Ohio. Brandon, he didn't call. He didn't visit. The last time I saw him was at a charity event where he walked past me without recognition, standing beside Ronald in a tuxedo, laughing with investors. I told myself I was okay with that. I told myself I had made peace. But when the phone rang that Monday morning, something shifted. "Mrs. Parker," the woman said, "I'm calling from Weston Lyle, attorneys at law, regarding the estate of Mr. Ronald Parker." I froze. "He's passed." "Yes, ma'am. Last Friday. The service will be held Thursday in Lexington. You've been named in the will." There was a long silence on my end. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected anything. Not an invitation, not even a mention. "I see," I said quietly. Is Brandon aware I've been contacted? I believe he will be, the woman said. Your presence is requested for the reading of the will Friday at 10 a.m. at our office downtown. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stood in the middle of my small kitchen for a long time. What did it mean? Why now? Was it guilt? A mistake? A legal formality? For 3 days, I cleaned the house, reread old letters, ironed a blouse I hadn't worn in years. I practiced answers to questions no one would ask. And each morning I told myself I didn't have to go. But each night, something in my chest said, go. Not for answers, not for money, but for your own peace. So, on Friday morning, I slipped on the same black coat I wore to my mother's funeral, and I drove back to the city that once knew me by a different name. The law office was tucked into one of those glass buildings that looked like they had no business being in Lexington. Sleek, cold, efficient. I sat in the reception area with my hands folded in my lap, my coat too warm for the room, my heart too loud for the silence. The receptionist offered me water. I declined. Brandon arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than my car. He didn't look at me, just walked straight past and muttered, unbelievable, under his breath. The attorney, Mr. Kenton, ushered us into a conference room with a mahogany table, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city I no longer recognized. We sat across from each other like strangers waiting for a verdict. Thank you both for coming, Kenton began. What we're about to read is Ronald Parker's final will and testament, executed 6 months before his passing. Please understand, this document reflects his personal wishes, reviewed multiple times under full legal capacity. Brandon nodded stiffly. I stayed silent. The reading began. To my son, Brandon Parker, I leave the family home on Mulberry Lane along with its furnishings and a monetary gift of $250,000 to be managed under advisory for a period of 2 years. Brandon blinked. A small, satisfied smirk appeared on his face. It vanished just as quickly when Kenton added, contingent on his continued employment with Parker Company and the successful completion of executive training. Brandon shifted. Excuse me? Kenton raised a brow, but continued. To my former wife, Elaine Margaret Parker, I leave all remaining shares and controlling interest in Parker Company Consulting, amounting to 64% of total company assets. I also bequeath the remaining funds in my personal estate, valued at approximately $27 million, as well as all future intellectual property and residual earnings. The room fell silent. Brandon's chair squeaked as he turned sharply toward me. What did you do? I was too stunned to answer. My mouth had gone dry. The words didn't make sense. The number didn't make sense. I haven't spoken to Ronald in 15 years, I managed to say. Exactly, Brandon snapped. So, why would he leave everything to you? You left. You gave up on him, on us. Kenton cleared his throat gently. Mr. Parker, your father included a personal letter to accompany this portion of the reading. He asked that it be read aloud. Brandon scoffed. Of course he did. A grand finale. Kenton opened a cream-colored envelope. His voice softened as he began. Elaine, if you are hearing this, it means I didn't get the chance to say these words in person. And I'm sorry for that. I should have said them long ago. I built an empire but lost my foundation. You, the woman who believed in me when no one else did. I didn't leave you this because I thought you needed the money. I left it because I needed you to know that everything I achieved started with you. Brandon is brilliant, but he doesn't yet know how to lead with heart. You do. Forgive me, not for leaving, but for letting you carry the silence alone. I looked down, my hands trembling in my lap. Brandon stood up so suddenly, his chair scraped hard against the floor. His face was pale with rage and betrayal. This is a joke. This is some twisted punishment. No, I said quietly. It's an acknowledgement long overdue. He turned, storming out without another word. And I sat there holding a letter from the man who had once forgotten me, but somehow in the end had remembered everything. The door slammed behind Brandon, echoing through the corridor like a final verdict. For a long moment, I didn't move. The letter still rested in my lap, its words pressing into my chest like something warm and heavy. The silence in the room was thick, but it wasn't empty. It held something sacred. Kenton cleared his throat quietly. "Mrs. Parker, would you like a moment alone?" I nodded. When he stepped out, I stared at the envelope again. Ronald's handwriting was sharp, deliberate. He had always been precise, even in emotion. And now, years after our divorce, he had handed me a version of truth I didn't know I needed. But my thoughts kept returning to Brandon. He had walked out full of fury. But behind that anger, I saw something else, something raw. A child who'd spent his entire life trying to live up to someone else's blueprint, his father's, and later, perhaps unknowingly mine. He had become so focused on performance that he never stopped to ask himself who he was without the applause. I wasn't angry at him. I couldn't be. He was raised in a world where worth was measured in outcomes and ownership, where love was earned through results. What chance did he have to see something else? But now maybe he would. I don't know what Ronald saw in his final days. What brought him to rewrite his will to leave everything to the woman he once left behind. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was clarity. But I know this. What he gave me was not just money, not just a title or a responsibility. He gave me something deeper. He gave me back my voice. He gave me back me. And perhaps without knowing it, he gave Brandon the chance to discover himself not as a legacy to inherit, but as a man to become. Sometimes the greatest gift we can leave is not control, it's release. In the weeks that followed, I met with Ronald's board of directors. I shook hands with people who once overlooked me at company dinners, who now stood when I entered the room. Their respect wasn't for my resume. It was for the legacy I had unknowingly helped shape. I didn't come to tear anything down. I came to rebuild gently. With guidance, I created a foundation in Ronald's name, but with my vision to fund education for single mothers returning to school and to support teachers who stay when others walk away. We called it the First Believer Fund because that's what I had been to him and to many others. The company remained strong, but its culture shifted. Small things, mostly staff lunches without a dress code, a wellness room for employees with aging parents, flexible hours for young mothers, no press releases, just people being seen. As for Brandon, we haven't spoken much, but last week I received a handwritten note in the mail. For words, "I'm trying. Forgive me." I haven't written back. Not because I'm angry. I'm just letting that silence hold space. The door isn't closed, but this time it opens on my terms. I don't see what happened as revenge. I don't think Ronald meant it that way either. It was recognition, quiet, overdue, but undeniable. For anyone who's ever been discarded, sidelined, or made to feel small, I hope you know this. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to win to be worthy. And sometimes the world comes back to whisper what it once refused to say out loud. You mattered. You always did. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or forgotten, I hope it reminds you that your worth is not measured by titles, by wealth, or by who stays and who leaves. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep living with grace, even when no one's watching. If this meant something to you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment below. Your voice matters, your story matters, and you are not alone.